When it comes to pharmacy residency interviews, there is one thing that you want to keep in mind. You must make yourself memorable in a good way. In today's video, I'll be sharing with you a few tips to help you prepare for your pharmacy residency interviews, and I'll also be sharing with you a few things you want to avoid if you want to make a good first impression. Hi, I'm Dr. K. Welcome to my channel where I help you live your best life by sharing advice and tips to help you grow personally so you can thrive professionally. The interview is your opportunity to connect with the interviewers. They already know that you're qualified for the job, otherwise they wouldn't have invited you for an interview. This is now the time that they want to get to know you. They're trying to determine if you will be a good fit for the program and if you're really someone that they can see themselves working with for the next year. Because of that, you want to make sure that you allow your personality to shine through during an interview. You don't want to just be so focused on making sure you rattle off all the perfect answers to every question that you seem like a robot with zero personality. Now, let's jump right into a few general interview tips that I've learned throughout my process interviewing for pharmacy residency programs. And also now that I'm on the other side of things, I get to experience what it's like being the interviewer as well. Okay, so the first tip that I have is to do your research on the organization, but also the people who you'll be interviewing with. By the time you reach interview day, you should have received an agenda that will outline the time that you'll be there, as well as each individual person you'll be interviewing with. So you really want to make sure you take some time to do some research about the people if you can. Of course, you may not be able to find a lot, but I suggest searching LinkedIn, but also the organization's website. Oftentimes, organizations, hospitals, schools, and things like that, they'll have like summaries of the person where they're talking about their career interests that may include a few hobbies and things like that. And so you really want to read those things, because if there is something there that you could help connect with that person, then that would be great. Of course, you want to make it something relevant. You don't want to try to force a connection and make it be awkward. But if it's something that flows within the conversation and it's something that you saw, for example, one of the people may have an interest, career interest in diabetes or something, and that may be something that you're interested in. And so you can mention that by saying something like, I saw on the organization's website that you're really interested in diabetes. Are you doing any current projects or research in that area? Because that's something that I'm interested in. And that can open up a whole avenue of conversation that not only shows your interest, but it also shows that you've done your research to really find out not just about the program, but the people who you'll be interviewing with. The second tip that I have is to keep in mind that your interview starts from the moment you walk into that building to the moment you get back to your car and off campus. So really keep that in mind. As you're walking into the building, you want to make sure that you're aware and present in your surroundings. Don't be so in your head that you're walking past people, you're not speaking and engaging with people, because you never know who can be out there that's seeing that. When you come in, whether it's the security guard or the receptionist at the desk that'll show you where you need to be, you need to make sure that you're nice and pleasant to everyone. Of course, I shouldn't have to say that, but I know sometimes on interview day, as I said before, we're nervous and we're so in our heads that we don't typically engage with the people around us like we normally would, but that can come off as standoffish and not give off the best first impression when it comes to an interview. The third tip that I have is that you have to become a master of persuasion. You have to remember that the interview, again, this is your opportunity to sell yourself and seal the deal. So you really want to make sure that you do that. One of the best ways to do that is by providing context. So when you're answering questions, make sure you provide enough context to paint the picture and give enough background so the person can really understand not only what was going on, but get a feel for what you were experiencing in that moment, whether it was excitement, fear, frustration, anxiety, whatever came with that. You want to make sure that you can provide enough context so they really can get the feeling of what was going on, because that's how they'll be able to learn more about you and your personality. So for example, here, if you have a question that may be asking something about time management, you don't want to just say that you're good with managing your time and you don't feel like there will be a problem when it comes to residency. Like, although that may be true, that really doesn't give them much context or anything to go off of. You have to paint the picture and tell a story. So for example, with that particular question, I received it at some point during my interviews. And I do remember elaborating on the fact that I didn't feel like it would be such a challenge because I had also juggled working 2 jobs as a pharmacist after pharmacy school. I worked full-time on my job in community pharmacy, and then I was also working doing part-time teaching at a community college in the pharmacy technician program. And as I told that story, I elaborated on the challenges that I did have with balancing that with my schedules and how it did become stressful at times, but I did enjoy doing it. And I just really had to make sure I planned ahead and planned well so that I wouldn't get overwhelmed with all of the duties I had going on and not let my full-time job slack or fall by the wayside. Basically, with that example, the point is I gave enough context to paint the picture for her to understand not only was I good with time management or I had certain skills that would help me be better with time management. I actually gave an example to say that I've done this and not just, oh, I'm good with time management. Because you can say that and then not actually be true. What have you done to prove or emphasize that, okay, the statement that you're saying is actually true? And that leads me to my fourth tip, which is paint the picture by telling a story. As I mentioned before, with being the master of persuasion, you want to really make sure that you provide enough context. In order to provide that context in a way that can be understood and received, you have to paint a picture to tell the story. Again, the goal is to really let that person feel like they were there and experiencing whatever it is you're explaining right there alongside you. The best way to do this is by using something called the STAR method when answering interview questions, specifically when you're answering behavioral-based questions. So those tell me about a time when, those type of questions, you really want to make sure that you can paint the picture well. Using the STAR method really will help you do that. And the STAR method basically is an acronym that stands for, the S would be you telling the situation. So describing exactly what situation you were in. The task then goes on to elaborate on what it is that you specifically needed to do in that moment. And then A, of course, would be your action, what it is that you actually did in that situation. And then the R is the result or the outcome that occurred from the situation and the actions that you had. So if you really organize your answers in a way using that STAR method, not only will you be able to provide enough context to paint the picture, you'll do it in a way that will make sure that they flow with you, because you don't want to be so elaborate and so long-winded that you lose them and you've said a whole lot and they still have no idea really what's going on. Okay, those are the few just general interview tips that I have for you that will help you really be successful in your pharmacy residency interviews. I have a few other videos dedicated to specific things such as phone and video interviews, as well as group and panel interviews. So really keep an eye out for those videos coming in the next few weeks. Also, I did a mock interview with one of my colleagues, Dr. Laney, which you'll be able to find on the channel. It's a full mock interview where we walk through example questions, we actually give an answer, and then we also give feedback on the answers that were given to really help you guys as far as preparing for those interviews. So really make sure you check out for that. I'll put a link for that video as well. Okay, so now that we've talked about a few general interview tips and things that you want to do on interview day, let's talk about a few things that you don't want to do on interview day. This idea is something that I came up with actually while I was at work, because I was overhearing some stories about some weird things that were going on during the mid-year interviews that happened specifically this year, because it was virtual and you had to kind of set aside specific appointment times. I heard a few stories and some of y'all are out there doing the most. So I decided to make sure that I do a little brief what not to do, so that you won't make a bad impression or a not so good impression right off the bat. And then now you are kind of like, I don't know about that one. We don't want that to happen. So let's jump right in. So this first one is avoid not interacting with other interviewers while you're at your interview. Now, of course, this will be in the case that you're having an on-site interview and other interviewees are around, which this year that may or may not be the case. I'm not sure. I feel like a lot of programs may be going virtual, but if you do actually have an on-site interview, make sure you interact with the other interviewees, because that's just weird. Like they really want to see that you're able to interact with other people, especially your peers, and especially if it's a program where you'll have co-residents. So don't be that standoffish person that's not interacting with everyone else while you're in that group setting, whether it's waiting for your interview, your individual interviews to start, or if you're at group lunch, or whatever interactions that you may have with the other interviewees. You really want to make sure you have some kind of interaction there. You don't want to be fake and do the most, because some people just really do too much, but just engage, be nice, be polite, and just not be super standoffish. Okay, the second one, please do not act like you know someone if you don't. Like, I understand the importance of networking, and they say it's all about who you know and not so much what you know, even though I do believe in that to an extent. You can't make a relationship or interaction be there that's not. So really try to be mindful of that. Like, if you know of someone from school, that's one thing. But to try to say that you really know them well, that's just not a good look. For one, because 9 times out of 10, that person's going to go back and ask them, and you don't want to then be like, oh, well, I mean, I know of them, but I don't really know them like that. Like, that's going to kind of make you seem like a liar a little bit, and that's not cool. And this idea, actually, this tip came because one of the current residents at my site had that happen. One of the students interacting with another resident during mid-year stated that they were really good friends and they knew her very well and all of this stuff to really elaborate to make a connection there. And then, of course, that resident went and asked her, okay, do you know such and such? They say they know you. And she's like, no, I mean, I know of them in passing at school, but I never really talked to them for real. I don't know her like that. And so now that makes you look like a liar, and that's not cool. So needless to say, that person kind of made themselves a little lower on the list just by trying to make a relationship be there that was not, and that's not cool. My third tip is do not message people on social media. With the exception of LinkedIn, and I really don't suggest you do that either, but with the exception of LinkedIn, please don't go messaging people on Facebook and Instagram. Like, that is just, I don't even know what word I'm looking for there, but it's just not appropriate. Like, first of all, Instagram and Facebook, those are our private, personal places to interact and have social with our family and friends. That is not where you have professional interaction. So if you meet a resident or a preceptor or the RPD or whoever it is and you need to contact them, you need to do so via email. If you don't have their email, then unfortunately that's your fault, because if you interacted with them at mid-year, you should have gotten their contact information. Sorry. In the event you really need to reach out to someone in the program and their email address you don't have or is not available on the website, find someone there that you have their email address to and ask them, hey, I need to reach such and such. Do you mind sending me their email address? I suggest finding any and every way to contact that person via their work and professional means versus going to their private social media, because again, it's just weird. 9 times out of 10, they're going to look at it and be like, this person is doing too much. They're kind of overstepping boundaries, and it just doesn't give you a good look. The next tip is don't get too comfortable with the current residents, especially if you don't know them. Now, if one of the current residents is someone that you remember from school, then yes, you can have interactions with them and, you know, have some familiarity. Why can't I say that word? But y'all know what I mean. That one. You want to have some interaction if you know this person, but you don't want to get too comfortable with the current residents because you are still in an interview. And the residents do have a voice and a say on whether or not you are ranked and matched. Of course, it's not at the level of the RPDs and preceptors, but residents do have a voice. So you don't want to give a bad impression now that you're in a setting with the residents and you've gotten a bit too comfortable. And the example that I have here, just to make this make sense, is there was a time during my residency, we were, of course, interviewing, and one of the applicants, he just really started talking about his social life and things that he liked to do outside of work, which that's not a problem. You do want to do that because you do have to have a life outside of residency. But the way in which he did it, it was just a little too lax. Like, he was talking about turning up and going to the club and drinking and all this stuff, which you may do. And I'm not judging you for that. But now isn't the time for you to talk about how much you like to turn up on the weekend. Like, yeah, you can mention that you like to go out and have a good time, but the way in which he did it was as if he was talking to another one of his friends. And in that setting, the current residents, they're not your friends. They're also interviewing and critiquing you, even if it's not a formal sit down across from you table type of interview. Okay, the next tip I have is to avoid asking weird or irrelevant questions. I know this one can be a bit challenging because, for one, you're always told to make sure that you have questions. And the truth about it is sometimes you really don't have any more questions. You've researched the website, you've asked all of the other people you've interviewed with, and this is the last person now that you're sitting down with, and you really may not have anything else to ask. But really be careful about asking things that are just off the wall or not so relevant to the setting that you're in. So an example that I have here is one of the current residents was having an interaction during mid-year, and the student went on to start talking about the fact that she was on her current critical care rotation, which we have a really large emphasis in critical care, so I can see why she would want to tie that in together. But she asked how she should keep up with current literature. And the way the question was worded, number one, it made the resident kind of question, why don't you know how to keep up with current literature as a P4 student, first of all. But then secondly, linking that to her critical care rotation, it was kind of like, how does this really tie together? It was really one of those questions that you could tell she just asked the question to get a question in there just to say that she asked one. And I know, again, sometimes your nerves and the situation, you just can't help it, but really just try to be mindful of that, because that was one of those questions that, although I wouldn't say was completely irrelevant, it didn't really tie into the flow of the conversation. If you're talking about a critical care rotation, there was a better way to kind of smooth and flow into that conversation a little better. Plus, like I said before, when it comes to researching current literature, as a fourth year student, you should already know how to do that. So maybe the way to bring that all together would be, okay, yeah, I'm currently on my critical care rotation, and I'm having to do a lot of research and keeping up with the changes in guidelines and things like that, especially with COVID being a thing. Like, there obviously aren't really guidelines, so we really have to focus on looking at primary literature. So in your current critical, in your residency, in your critical care rotations, or any of the other rotations, have you really felt like you've had to do a lot of that? And if so, what is the best way that you found to do so? That's not specifically you asking them how to do it, because again, you should know how to do it, but more so, what do they do? Do they have tips that could help you? It's all about the way that you word things. Some of you may be looking at this and say, I don't see how those are two different things, but make it flow, make it make sense, and ask the question in a way that doesn't either make you seem like you're asking something that's irrelevant or asking a question that you should already know. Those are the two things you don't want to do. And my last tip is, don't try too hard to impress someone. Of course, the interview is your time to sell yourself. You want to be persuasive. You want to make sure that you paint the picture that you're the best person for that position. But don't be extra and do the most. Like, we all know that person that's just over the top, overly excited, just overly doing the most, basically. And it comes across as fake. You don't want to be fake. You want to show your genuine self. You want to show your genuine excitement and desire to be there, but not so much that they question whether or not this is an act, because that's a turnoff. If you think about it from a dating standpoint, ladies, we're just going to speak to the ladies for a minute, guys. If you are in a situation where there's a guy that's interested in dating you and he's just really heavily just on you like that, like, even if you may have been interested, the fact that he's trying so hard is now a turnoff, because you're like, okay, back up. Like, the same applies in an interview setting. You don't want to be so overly excited and overly aggressive and overly peppy that it comes across fake and just too much, and it just turns people off. I know for me, I don't like it, because I want to see authenticity. I want to see who you are and really genuinely what you bring to the table, not this fake persona that you showed up with today. All right, so that wraps up the video for today. I gave you guys a few general interview tips and also some tips on things not to do, and I really hope that you found those tips useful. If so, please make sure you give me a thumbs up and share this video with someone else that may find it useful. Also, make sure you check out the playlist with other pharmacy residency interviews where I share some tips. I show examples of my CVs and all kinds of other things that you may find useful as you walk through the rest of this application process. Also, if you like the information and the content shared here on the channel, please make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell so you won't miss out when I upload new videos. Next week, I will have another interview tips video, so make sure that you're subscribed and that notification bell is on so you won't miss out. Until next time, peace.